Have you ever been on the receiving end of someone else's kindness? I mean, have you ever been given a generous gift and been just a little embarrassed in accepting it? Well, if so, you'll know the power of generosity. But how can we live generous lives when we don't have much to give? And should we even be thinking about generosity in the middle of a cost of living crisis? Well, that's what we're going to be thinking about today as we conclude our cost of living series. Now, my name's Steve, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to Forge Online. You know, generosity might seem like a crazy thing to be speaking about when money is short, when we're struggling to make ends meet. The cost of living has hit everyone's wallets and bank balances hard, hasn't it? You know, companies are going bust, businesses are closing. So to speak of generosity now just seems like bad timing, right? But actually, we all know how beautiful generosity is, don't we? I mean, maybe you'd love to be generous because in a sense, who doesn't want that? I mean, we'd all love to have said at our funeral, you know, how generous we were. Nobody wants to be seen as mean, do they? But maybe you're one of those people who are just not able to be generous yet. You know, when my income is higher, you know, when my bank balance is stronger, when I'm in a little less debt, or it might even be, well, actually, I have the resources, but I just need a little more certainty. You know, everything still feels a little unstable at present, but once those things are sorted, I think I can be a little more generous. Well, I get that, because I've thought those thoughts too. So today, maybe I can challenge us. Maybe God can stretch our faith just a little bit so that we can experience what Jesus said when he said these words. It's more blessed to give than to receive. Or, as the Message version puts it, you're far happier giving than getting. You see, surprisingly, generosity has little to do with how much we have. You know, it's easy to think that wealth and generosity go hand in hand. You know, the wealthier you are, the more generous you can be. But the truth is that wealthy people are not generous. Generous people are generous. And it has nothing to do with how much. It has everything to do with our mindset. So let me read you some verses in a letter called 2 Corinthians. Paul, who's this church planter who took the message of Jesus to the major cities in the known world, wrote to the Christians in a town or a city called Corinth. And as part of his letter, he picks up on this generosity theme, and he writes this. Now, I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in his kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia. They are being tested by many troubles, and they're very poor. But they are also filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed in rich generosity. For I can testify that they gave not only what they could afford, but far more. And they did it of their own free will. They begged us again and again for the privilege of sharing in the gift for the believers in Jerusalem. They even did more than we had hoped, for their first action was to give themselves to the Lord and to us, just as God wanted them to. Now, these people in Macedonia were incredibly poor. They had a huge cost of living crisis, which left them with nothing. Yet Paul was using them as an example to the Christians in Corinth of rich generosity. I mean, how could people who have so little end up giving so much? Well, it was because it wasn't about the amount, but everything to do with their mindset. See, often we have mindsets that we don't realize, but they limit us. You know, mindsets that stop us from stepping out. I can't do this. I couldn't achieve that. I certainly shouldn't do that. But the church in Macedonia were actually begging Paul to be able to give and support those Christians struggling in Jerusalem. They were filled with joy, which overflowed into generosity. You see, so often our mindsets can limit us and we're not even aware of it. You know, for many people, they have a not enough mindset. I just don't have enough time. I just don't have enough money. I just have limited resources and it feels like I never have enough. You see, what's interesting about that mindset is that there are people who are on benefits who think they don't have enough. There are people who earn the minimum wage who think they don't have enough. There are people on 30,000 who think they don't have enough. And you know what? Crazily, there are people on 100,000 who feel like they don't have enough. Not enough is not an amount, it's a mindset. You see, we serve an abundant God who not only wants to provide more than we need, but he also wants to meet the needs of others through us. And so we need to adjust our mindset, asking God to help us to have a mindset shift from not enough to more than enough. You know, I remember back in the 90s, Sarah, my first wife, and I sitting down in the early years of our marriage. You know, neither of us had been particularly generous in our giving up until this point. And in fact, we were more on the receiving end of people's generosity at the time, because I was working part-time with the church and the rest of the time was relying on speaking out at churches and being given gifts. A friend came with me to one church where I spoke and I got a £10 book voucher and £5 petrol money. And we wasted the petrol money on a drink on the way home. Honestly, other churches were more generous. But I remember having to speak on tithing one Sunday. So I read some books and studies and I really sensed that this was what God wanted us to do. So from a position of not having much, but wanting to be generous, we changed our mindset. And we gave 10% of our income to the church. And honestly, we thought it would make us financially poorer. But we discovered that God's maths and our maths were very different. You know, to give 10% of our gross income didn't make us poorer. Changing our mindset to move to more than enough saw God provide in other ways and make up the difference. You know, our old not enough mindset was ditched, and now Sarah and I have carried on that approach. And to be honest, Sarah has to remind me at times that God has always provided what we've needed, so why would he stop now? So go on, try it, I dare you. Change your thinking from I don't have enough to I have more than enough, and enjoy being generous. Discover for yourself that God's maths, honestly, is better than yours. You know, Andy Hunt, who's been running the Mind Over Money sessions, he left a better paid job at Barclays to take on a role at Anglia Care Trust, a local charity supporting people who are facing difficulties in life. And it was what God had placed in his heart to do, but it involved a pay cut which made the decision quite difficult. But you know, making that transition proved to be not as hard as he and Jamelia thought. They made some adjustments, but somehow God made up the difference. That's what he's able to do when we step out in faith. We discover that we have more than enough. And it's a great mindset to have, and it makes generosity possible. I mean, it's true with the Forge too. You know, we've struggled financially over the past 5 years or so. So the question is raised about how much we give away. You know, should we cut back on our external giving, which is usually between kind of 14 and 17% of our income. It's always been a temptation, but we haven't given in yet. Why? Because we have to live with the more than enough mindset, not a we don't have enough mindset. And amazingly, over the past couple of years, God has used the Forge to be the conduit to other charities' money. You know, other foundations have said, who has contacts with these families in need? It's the Forge. Okay, we'll give them the money and ask the Forge to pass it on to families in need. I mean, how cool is that? You see, God provides to meet our needs and to meet the needs of others through us. And when you give to God, you don't lose anything. You gain something. You gain the opportunity to participate in what He is doing. You're investing in something that has eternal consequences. And you might be thinking that when it comes to the Forge for Becky in her role as local and global community director, it's easy for her to be generous and to give away money to families in need because it's not her money. And do you know what? You'd be right. Which is the second key thing to remember in order to be generous. It's much easier to give when it's not your money. You see, if I gave you a £10 note and asked you to give it away to someone in need or to a charity, honestly, you would do that easily. If I asked you to take £10 out of your wallet and do the same, it's suddenly harder. Why? Because it's your money. Well, I mentioned in week 1 of this series that we have a kind and generous God who provides for us, and everything that we have actually comes from him. It's not ours. You know, about 1,000 years before Jesus came, a man called David, the guy who beat Goliath, if you recognize that story, he was the king of Israel, and he asked the people to donate money and gold and silver in preparation for his son Solomon to build the temple in Jerusalem. And people gave extravagantly. And David recognized something that we need to understand too, because this is what he said to God. He says, "But who am I? And who are my people that we should give anything to you? Everything we have has come from you, and we give you only what you first gave us." Now, when we gain that perspective in understanding what we have is God's resources, not ours, then it makes it easier to give and to live generously. It really does. It's always easier to give away someone else's money. And all we're doing is stewarding his money. So, mindset shift number 2, from my resources to God's resources. You know, when we do this, it starts unlocking something different in us. It helps us to look for ways to bless people, in asking how God might want us to use those resources. And we recognize that God has been so generous to us, and that he wants to use us to be generous to others. We're just managers. So, we need to change our mindset from not enough to more than enough. We need to change our mindset from my resources to being God's resources. And thirdly, we need to have a mindset shift from I'll give when to I'll give now. See, if we go back to the reading that we looked at earlier in 2 Corinthians, when Paul wrote about the Macedonian people giving so generously from the very little that they had, he then goes on to write these words. "Now, you should finish what you started. Let the eagerness you showed in the beginning be matched now by your giving. Give in proportion to what you have." You see, a year earlier, the Corinthians had committed to give. They were eager to support the Christians who were struggling in Jerusalem, and they'd given a little. In fact, they were the first people to give. But then, well, basically they hadn't followed through. And Paul is saying, you've got to match your eagerness to give with actual giving. If you want to experience the overflowing of joy of generosity, just like the Macedonian church did, you can't just have the intention of giving, a plan to give, a thought that one day you'll give. No, you need to step into it and start giving now. There are always plenty of reasons not to, but as Nike says, it's never too early to begin and never too late to start. And we'll never have too much or not enough to start being generous. Take a listen to Steve and Zoe's story.
So I'm Zoe, married to Stephen. We've got 2 children, 2 girls and 2 stepdaughters, and I am a student midwife.
I'm Stephen Shears. I'm married to Zoe, and I currently work in a residential care home for teenagers with disabilities. I think we've been living on faith for the last 4 years.
Yeah. Whilst training to be a midwife, I've obviously had to be out of work for 4 years. I've trained for. So throughout those 4 years, people have been extremely generous. So somebody came up to us at church and
in September.
said that they felt God was saying that they needed to help us out, basically. And I just burst into tears.
And so did I.
But it's got us through. I don't like saying it, but they have basically paid our rent for several months. So that has just been amazing, and we couldn't have got through the last few months without that.
God's work doesn't ever seem to be done, so the generosity of others and the blessing that it puts upon us and what we are able to give to others as well is a massive blessing.
I think just when you feel like something's gone wrong with the car or something's gone wrong with the house, and you think, how are we going to get through this month? And then something comes up.
Yeah, every time.
Before I started training, and Stephen had like a full-time job, and we were well off, we were able to be generous to others at that time, and I feel like that's kind of come around. Like, we were faithful at that time, therefore God's not forgotten us. You look back and you think how good God has been to us.
Yeah, and during the last 4 years, we've also given in our time and been quite generous with certain things.
Yeah, you don't always have to be generous with money.
No.
It's it's just looking out for people.
And being able to give what we have as well.
Yeah.
You know, I've been giving meat hampers to people that are less fortunate and not able to, you know, perhaps feed themselves, and just makes life a little bit easier for them.
Yeah, or having people over for meals.
Yeah, I think it's just living on faith and having the faith that it will happen somehow.
I think, like we said, generosity doesn't always have to come in the form of money. It can come in the form of just popping round for a cup of tea when someone's in need, or just listening to somebody, or remembering someone's birthday, or...
It's just finding the time for other people, isn't it, sometimes?
Yeah. I think it's like the whole tithing thing as well, isn't it? When you give, you get back.
Yeah.
And we've always found that where we've been generous, it's always come back, and God's been generous to us in different ways.
More ways than one, hasn't he?
I love what they've shared. You know, they're a family who honestly don't have much, but they live out a generous mindset, and I love them for it. And God doesn't want to give us just eternal life. He wants to give us abundant life. And over the years, we have been blessed by many people giving generously into the life of this church. And if that's you, I want to say thank you. You know, we've been able to do what we do because of that generosity. But imagine if we all decided to be generous, that we shifted our mindset from not enough to having more than enough, that we shifted our thinking from my resources to God's resources, and then we moved from I'll give when to I'll give now. Imagine the families that we could help, the individuals we could support, the projects that we could start, the kids that we could sponsor in Maposa out in Zambia. You know, look, for those of you who are on the sidelines, who may want to be generous, but you haven't quite had the courage to express generosity, I want to encourage you to push through the mindsets that limit you and realize that we have a God who has more than enough to meet our needs. So come on, what's stopping you? What's stopping you from being the generous person that you'd love to be? Is it fear? Well, God says, trust me. If it's, I don't have enough, enough isn't an amount, it's a mindset. Be generous out of what you have. And you might be thinking, but it's a poor time to start giving during the cost of living crisis. There will never feel like a good time to start. So just start now. And then you discover the truth in Jesus' words when he said, it is more blessed to give than to receive, or as it says in the Message version, you're far happier giving than getting. So if you'd like to play a part in supporting the mission of the Forge in helping people to find and follow Jesus, you can give via our website as a one-off gift, or even better, a standing order on a monthly basis. You can just use the QR code. Or you can start sponsoring a child in Maposa in Zambia, enabling a child to have healthcare and food and education. Or you can support those going to Zambia or Croatia or Guatemala this year and help them raise the funds needed for the trip. There are so many opportunities for us to express generosity. And I just call on you, appeal to you to start now. We have a generous God, and he's worth demonstrating that generous nature of his through to other people. Let me pray. God, I thank you that you give us so much. Lord, at times we look at our bank balance and we see that it's fairly empty or in the red. But God, when we just look around us, you give us so much. And so we want to say thank you for that. And we want to bring our requests to you as well and say, God, please would you break through these poor mindsets that we have, that we don't have enough. Lord, would you reshape our thinking of that and recognize that actually we have more than enough, and that what we have isn't even ours, but it's yours. And so would you help us to not delay, but to start giving now, and for generosity to be expressed through who we are and how we live. In Jesus' name, amen.
Christ is my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand when everything around me is shaking. And I've never been more glad that I put my faith in Jesus, 'cause He's never let me down. He's faithful through generations. So why would He fail now? He won't, and He won't. I've still got joy, and I've still got joy in chaos. I've got peace that makes no sense, so I won't be going under. I'm not held by my own strength, 'cause I've built my life on Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful in every season. So why would He fail now? He won't.
Hi, my name is Riona and I want to tell you who I am. I'm 26 years old and I'm engaged to James. I'm also a self-employed musician and private music teacher. For a couple of years, I worked as a secondary school music teacher, something I wanted to do since I was a child. However, over the last few years, I've had various health complications that actually forced me to stop doing this. I suffer with two conditions: chronic cluster headaches and chronic migraines, which have a huge impact on my daily life. Becoming self-employed has on one hand given me the freedom to work when I want, and I'm doing what I love as a job. But it also means when I struggle with my health now, I won't get paid for when I'm so poorly that I can't work. This is obviously very stressful when I'm struggling with my health. I'm questioning my ability to perform and teach my passion. Am I a person who used to be good but just doesn't have what it takes anymore? Is that who I am? If my identity is based on how well I perform, I'm always going to struggle and live with doubts and fears. But my real identity is not built on that. Let me tell you who I am. I am a child of God, loved, redeemed, and accepted by Him. I am made by Him, created in His image, and am God's masterpiece. That's not me bigging it up. It's me accepting what God says about me. And I'm going to go with that. That's who I am.